Welcome back. It's now time to go in depth. The highly anticipated 2010 West Kingston Commission of Inquiry report has been published. The commission was chaired by retired Barbadian Chief Justice Sir David Simmons. The extensive document investigated what took place during the joint military and police operations into Tivoli Gardens to capture then fugitive Christopher Dudder-Skoke. Among the findings, the commission raised concerns about the use of mortars, labeling the action a serious error of judgment. It made reference to questionable killings on the part of the Jamaica Constabulary Force JCF, noting there were at least 15 persons that could have been killed by members of the JCF. Now, among the recommendations, the Commission has advised the government to apologize and compensate affected residents. To help us better understand the findings of the Commission report, we are joined by human rights advocate Susan Goffe and attorney at law Bert Samuels. Thanks so much for joining me, Mr. Samuels and Ms. Goffe.
Thank you
very much for the invitation.
Okay, Mr. Samuels, let's begin with you. Quite a comprehensive report. What were your initial reactions to the findings, and are you surprised by any of the revelations outlined in the 900-page document?
No, I'm not at all. I was always concerned that the use of the military would come out as though they were at war, and then the use of those, the use of that which was said should not be used against the person. Is it the mortar tub? What was it?
Mortars.
Mortars.
Right.
Yes. That's that. Because the army is for war. The army comes to kill. Therefore, that overkill was part of my concern from the very beginning. I'm not surprised at the findings. We always had our suspicions that there were too many gaps and holes in the whole explanation why there were so many civilians dead and so few security forces dead. If you look at any war crime, if you look at any army that goes out, if they have to kill 60-odd, 70-odd people, that is because they're under severe attack, and because the disproportionate account by the army for casualties and the security forces, and so many civilians die.
Okay.
For example, the retreat of shells is become very ridiculous because the amount of shells that were recovered was maybe 1% of that which was fired. So who is it that interfered with the crime scene? And I was very, very, very impressed with the way in which the Commission treated the whole area as a crime scene, and that there were things that needed to be explained that were just glaringly lies told to the Jamaican people.
Okay. Thanks. Ms. Goffe, Jamaicans for Justice, JFJ, have long argued that several residents were killed under questionable circumstances. Now, that's a ruling the Commission spoke to. What sort of picture does this paint about the operations of the security forces back in 2010?
We need to remember that this report, 900 pages long, has only been released about 24 hours ago. So we are still in our initial stages of looking at the report. However, I think that it is clear from what we have seen so far that the issues to do with the killings of persons is one of the highlights of the report. The Commission has endorsed that there should be continued criminal investigations into the killings of residents, some of whom, it seems from the evidence that was put forward, strongly suggests that they were unlawfully killed by unidentified police officers. And so there is a need for Indepth to continue its investigation, and that there is a need also for the government to make sure that Indepth has the resources to conduct those impartial investigations free from obstacles or frustrations. This also goes over into long-standing concerns about the operations within the security forces and the need for reforms, which is something that the Commission has in fact also recommended, that there needs to be improvements, for example, in their use of force, the management of firearms, civilian oversight. So there are these long-standing issues which have been raised yet again for consideration and implementation. And it's the action that we need in terms of these reforms if we are in fact to move forward from what was obviously a very, very problematic and tragic experience in May 2010.
Mr. Samuels, as Ms. Goffe just stated, the Commission has endorsed continued criminal investigation into the killings of residents. Now, is there any certainty that culpable officers will be held accountable?
Well, you know, one of the ironies of this war is who will police the police. It's kind of very, the Jamaican public has become very cynical with, after the fact, police are engaged with civilians, and the same police officers are the ones to carry out the investigations. That mistrust is very live in this situation, and therefore the job of Indepth will be hamstringed, because we must recall that the Minister of National Security at the time did give some level of immunity to the security forces under the emergency powers regulations, and therefore the Indepth is going to have some difficulty because of this, as it were, immunity given to the security forces. The crime scene has been interfered with. That's part of the Commission report's findings, and therefore there's some amount of pessimism that it surrounds the objective, you know, treatment of the crime scene at the in Tivoli. So I don't think that the public thinks that much will come of that, for the reasons I've given.
Okay. Ms. Goffe, 5 years later, the incursion took place in 2010. The government has been advised to compensate and to publicly apologize in Parliament to the victims. Will this bring any sort of closure to affected residents of Tivoli Gardens?
Well, I think that we need to be looking at that there are many factors that need to play into people's feelings that justice has been done, that there is an opportunity for healing. And one thing that has been noted in many jurisdictions, many situations, is that where the state recognizes the excesses carried out by its own agents, which has damaged individuals, communities, families, etc., makes a formal public apology for those excesses. It is part of a process of healing. It is part of accepting responsibility and acknowledging openly that wrong and harm was done. But that isn't sufficient. So compensation is also a part of a process of healing. Compensation in monetary terms is often very important to help people be restored to a position of replacement of property, an acknowledgement of loss. So life can never be compensated for with money, loss of life. But they've mentioned other kinds of compensation. For example, the provision of ongoing adequate counseling care for the hundreds and hundreds of community members, including children particularly, who went through this. So it's part of a process that has to take place, and at the center of that process has to be the people who were damaged, the voices of the people who were damaged as this process goes forward.
Okay, Mr. Samuels, the report pointed out some of the glaring deficiencies that occurred between the joint military operation. The police commissioner, the then police commissioner, Mr. Owen Ellington, said he had no idea that mortars were being used, and Major General Saunders said he authorized the mortars when he gave his testimony at the Commission of Inquiry. What does it tell us about our security system and going forward to ensure this mayhem does not repeat itself?
What it does show is, are we prepared to say that there was a state of war in Tivoli? A state of war, what you go to do is to kill. Outside of that, the police are in charge of the security of our country. How could a device being used by the army not be known to and basically approved by the police? This was something to find one person. We mustn't forget that. This incursion was to go and find the scope. And it took the police the security forces rather, that kind of heavy armor to go and find him. And they didn't find him. It means that he wasn't, very likely was not there. We all know that he had enough time to leave. And therefore, this was just possibly a punishment against a community not for finding the scope, but just unleashing terror upon the people.
Okay. And Ms. Goffe, the final 30 seconds to you. As Mr. Samuels just said, the search was for one person, but they ended up killing 70 persons. What's the lesson to be learned from this?
Well, I think that what we have to be very clear on is that at the center of all security operations, there needs to be a regard for the human rights and security of the people involved, and protection measures have to be built into any of the operational plans and policies, and they have to be implemented and followed.
Okay, Ms.
An operation in which you have lost the lives of 69 people is a failed operation.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Goffe and Mr. Samuels. That's where we'll have to leave it for this discussion. Thank you so much for joining me.